The chandeliers above the ballroom burned like captive suns. Each flame reflected 100 times in crystal and polished marble, so that the night itself seemed to glow with borrowed splendor. Music drifted in careful waves, measured and obedient, as couples moved with practiced grace beneath the watchful eyes of London society. In such rooms, fortunes were weighed without coin, and a woman's worth to be settled by the tilt of a stranger's smile. Whispers slid through the air like silk ribbons, delicate yet binding, and every guest knew that tonight, as always, someone would leave diminished. She stood near the edge of it all, neither guest nor servant, occupying that narrow, perilous space reserved for women of reduced circumstance. As a temporary lady's companion, she was permitted to observe but never belong, to listen yet never speak unless spoken to. Her gown was modest, carefully mended, chosen to offend no one and impress no one either. She felt the glances brush past her, measuring, dismissing, already forgetting. Still, she watched with attention sharpened by necessity, for when one has little power, observation becomes a form of defense. The Duke's arrival altered the room in ways no announcement could have achieved. Conversation softened, shoulders straightened, laughter recalibrated itself to a more respectful pitch. He carried authority without ostentation, the kind earned through service and sharpened by restraint. His reputation preceded him, spoken of in murmurs tied to the crown, to Parliament, to decisions that shaped men's lives far beyond the glittering walls of ballrooms. Such influence inspired loyalty in some, and a quiet, corrosive envy in others. She had seen men like him before, admired from a distance, never imagined as anything more than figures passing through her limited world. It was while the orchestra shifted into a slower measure that she noticed the exchange. A glass was offered, accompanied by a smile too eager, a bow too deep. The Duke accepted it with polite ease, unaware of the glance that followed between two gentlemen standing just beyond the reach of the light. It was not proof, only instinct, but something in her tightened, a warning sounded by no rule she had ever been taught. She hesitated, knowing the cost of error. A woman in her position had no right to interfere, no voice that would be forgiven if raised without invitation. Her mind raced through consequences as swiftly as her heart. Silence would preserve her safety. Intervention would destroy it. Yet the image of that shared look, sharp and fleeting, would not release her. She stepped forward before reason could restrain her, the hem of her gown whispering across the floor like a confession. Leaning close, she spoke quickly, urgently, the words barely formed before her hand struck the glass. It tipped, spilled, shattered the moment with a splash against stone and satin. The music faltered. Breath caught. 100 eyes turned as one. The spill lay between them like evidence of a crime, and she stood frozen beside it, already feeling the weight of judgment descend. She expected rebuke, perhaps removal, the quiet escort that would end her evening and quite possibly her employment. In such places, dignity was fragile, and she had broke a rule without knowing its name. Instead, the Duke turned fully toward her. His expression held surprise, yes, but not anger. He took her hand with deliberate calm, lifting it so that all could see. The gesture was unmistakable, protective, and profoundly improper in its implications. Murmurs rippled outward, reshaping themselves into speculation. He leaned close, his voice meant for her alone, and said 3 words that steadied her trembling breath and altered the course of her life. "You have courage." The ballroom never truly recovered its former rhythm, though the orchestra resumed and the dancers returned to their patterns. What lingered instead was the memory of a hand taken too publicly, of a woman lifted from invisibility into dangerous notice. By the next morning, the incident had already softened and sharpened in retelling, altered by those who required it to mean something else. Some called it gallantry, others recklessness, but nearly all agreed upon one point. The young woman had become a subject of interest, and interest in London was rarely kind. She felt it immediately. Doors that had once opened without comment now paused before admitting her. Conversations adjusted their course when she approached, voices lowering, eyes flicking toward her with curiosity sharpened by judgment. Her employer, usually warm enough, regarded her with new calculation, as though weighing the inconvenience of association against the benefit of proximity to a duke. She moved carefully, speaking less, listening more, aware that her fate now rested in stories told by others. The Duke, for his part, did nothing ostentatious. He did not seek her out in crowded rooms nor offer gestures that would confirm the most scandalous interpretations. Instead, his attention arrived in quieter forms, all the more powerful for their restraint. A note was delivered, written in a precise, elegant hand, thanking her again for her presence of mind, and assuring her that she need not fear the consequences of that evening. The words were measured, respectful, yet beneath them ran an unmistakable current of regard. She read it more than once, folding it carefully as though it were something fragile and rare. Whispers, however, are not soothed by silence. By week's end, her name had found its way into conversations far above her station. Some suggested ambition disguised as virtue. Others hinted at manipulation born of desperation. Each version stripped her of agency in a different way. She bore it with outward composure. Though alone, she felt the familiar ache of precariousness settle into her bones. She had lived long enough on the edge of respectability to know how swiftly it could crumble. The Duke intervened again, subtly, deliberately. Invitations appeared where her presence was appropriate, never singular, always respectable. A place was made for her near those who could not easily dismiss her without appearing unkind. He spoke to her only when circumstance allowed, his tone polite, his words chosen with care. Yet in his glances there was something steady, a reassurance that did not depend upon promise. She began to understand that protection, when done properly, was an art as disciplined as any dance. Their first true conversation occurred away from the noise, in a library where lamplight softened the edges of the world. He thanked her again, this time without witnesses, acknowledging not only the act but the risk she had taken in performing it. She answered honestly, admitting fear and uncertainty, confessing that she had acted without thinking of consequence. He listened without interruption, a courtesy not often extended to women in her position. When he spoke, it was to reveal that the danger had been real, that influence invited resentment, and resentment sometimes sought satisfaction through humiliation rather than force. For a moment, they stood suspended between what was said and what could never be. The space between them felt charged, not with impropriety, but with possibility restrained by mutual understanding. She realized then that she was not merely grateful to him. She was drawn by his seriousness, his refusal to diminish her courage by dismissing it as impulse. He, in turn, seemed to see her not as a complication, but as a reminder of something honorable in a world grown adept at concealment. The fragile balance did not last. A rumor, sharpened by repetition, reached a place it should not have reached. Her name was spoken with implication before those who valued appearances above truth. The consequence arrived quietly, in the form of an uncertain look from her employer and an invitation withdrawn without explanation. She understood the message without needing it spelled aloud. Whatever protection had existed was no longer sufficient, and the next choice would belong not to her, but to him. The withdrawal of the invitation confirmed what she had feared but refused to name, that her careful standing had begun to erode in ways no explanation could repair. She packed her small belongings with deliberate calm, folding each item as though order itself might preserve her dignity. There were no accusations spoken aloud, no dramatic dismissal, only the quiet distancing that society preferred when discarding what had become inconvenient. She understood then that courage, once displayed, demanded a price, and that she was being asked to pay it alone. Word reached the Duke before the day was finished. He received it without visible reaction, yet those who knew him well recognized the stillness that preceded decision. For years he had navigated the treacherous waters of influence with caution, aware that every public gesture carried weight beyond intention. Aligning himself openly with a woman of her position would invite scrutiny not only upon her, but upon the causes he served. He considered this carefully, not because he doubted her worth, but because he respected the cost of what he might choose to do next. They met once more in a drawing-room arranged for formality, its symmetry designed to discourage emotional excess. She stood straight, refusing to let uncertainty bend her posture, though her hands trembled despite her resolve. He spoke first, acknowledging the consequences that had followed her intervention, naming them without apology or embellishment. She listened, prepared for gratitude tempered by farewell, for kindness bound by prudence. Instead, his words turned toward responsibility, not obligation, but choice. He declared, in a voice measured and clear, that her character had been misjudged and that any stain upon her reputation had been incurred in his service. He stated this before witnesses carefully selected, those whose approval carried weight and whose silence would not be purchased lightly. In doing so, he shifted the narrative, recasting her act not as presumption, but as loyalty recognized by its proper authority. The room absorbed this adjustment slowly, resistance softened by the inevitability of his standing. When they were alone again, the restraint he had maintained finally loosened. He spoke not of politics or protection, but of the moment she had stepped forward, unasked and unafraid, when others had remained still. He admitted that courage such as hers unsettled him precisely because it reminded him of the ideals he had once believed unquestionable. She answered with equal honesty, confessing that she had never expected to be seen, let alone defended, and that the knowledge changed how she viewed herself. In that exchange, something quiet and profound settled between them. He did not speak of love, nor did she. Such declarations belonged to another kind of story, one that ignored the architecture of their world. Instead, he offered a future framed by respect, where her presence would be acknowledged rather than hidden, her voice heard rather than tolerated. She understood what was being offered and what it required in return, and she accepted not with eagerness, but with clarity. Dignity, once reclaimed, could not be surrendered again. Society adjusted as it always did, reshaping itself around power and conviction. Those who had whispered found new subjects. Those who had judged found reasons to revise their opinions. The danger that had once hovered receded, not erased, but contained by deliberate choice. She moved forward into her altered life aware that security was never permanent, yet strengthened by the knowledge that she had faced risk and survived it intact. The final image lingered not in grandeur, but in quiet continuity. A carriage rolled through the early morning streets, the city softened by mist and possibility. She looked out upon a world that no longer felt entirely closed to her, while beside her sat a man who had learned that courage could arrive in unexpected forms. The narrator's voice, gentle and reflective, would later remind the listener that history often turns on moments that seem small at first glance. A whisper, a spill, a hand taken at the right time. Such acts rarely announce themselves as destiny, yet they alter lives all the same, leaving behind not spectacle, but a deeper, steadier hope.